Let's talk about the evidence for evolution. So there's all kinds of pieces of evidence for evolution. A common one, most people, they want to see what life looked like in the past, and that's basically found in fossils, all right? There's a few different kinds of fossils. Sometimes fossils are found in amber. Sometimes they're found in what's called like a cast in a rock, and sometimes they're an imprint within a rock structure, okay? How do we know how old fossils are? Well, we can do two kinds of aging. We can have relative aging and absolute aging, all right? Relative aging means we don't really have an accurate idea of exactly how old it is, but based on how deep we find it in rock layers, tells us how old it is. The deeper it is, the older it is. The more shallow it is, the relatively newer or younger it would be. So when you do relative aging, you're generally using superpositioning, how deep you are in the rock structure. Absolute aging does not use superposition. Absolute aging uses the carbon aging I mentioned in the previous lecture. So when you're using half-lives and radiometric dating of things, for example, like carbon, you are getting an actual numerical value that is an absolute age. So superpositioning in rocks would give you relative aging. Carbon dating would give you an absolute age. What do fossil records tell us? Well, they tell us that organisms lived at different times. Different organisms lived at different times. They show us that some things from the past don't exist today. They show us that things that exist today didn't even exist in the past sometimes. So organisms found in layers that are adjacent to each other, for example, if you're next to another fossil, you are in that rock, you are relatively the same age. If you are below them in that rock structure, this is superpositioning, these are older down here, and then these are older, and these are older, and so on. The oldest rocks are on the bottom, the youngest rocks or youngest fossils are towards the top. A transitional species, my favorite person, Mr. Thomas, he is like what we would call the missing link, so to speak. The missing link, we have not found the missing link yet. Everybody wants to see the link between primates and humans, but I would say Mr. Thomas in this photo is probably the closest thing we have to the missing link or the transitional species that everyone is looking for. Biogeography, more terminology. What this shows us is that organisms, this shows us that the Earth was probably not the way it looked like today. Today's Earth is spread out. But what we have noticed is we have noticed that certain species have ancestral species that would resemble species on other continents. If those continents are now separated by oceans, which means at one point the Earth was probably one giant landmass or giant landmasses where organisms were able to travel across certain areas. They were closer to each other. Now we have this, between Africa and South America, you have the Atlantic Ocean, and organisms are not able to cross that ocean. But we have noticed a lot of similar characteristics in by studying locations of organisms around the world. We have found relationships that showed that these land masses were closer together than they are today. Homologous structures. Now, these are pieces of evidence that show that species with similar anatomy, okay, same structure, similar anatomy, but different function, for example, like an arm of a human, the front limb of a cat, the flipper of a whale, and one of the wings of a bat. These species, okay, all of which are mammals, have similar bone structure. So, but do they do different things? Yeah, they have different functions. Even though they do different things, they are still showing a relationship from an evolutionary scale. Any species with homologous structures suggest common ancestry in an evolutionary relationship. Analogous structures. Sometimes people think that just because two things fly, they are more closely related, or because two things both live in the ocean, they are very closely related, and that is not always the case. Sometimes they develop the ability to fly, for example. They evolve the ability to fly completely independently of each other, and they are not showing an evolutionary relationship. Just because they can fly does not mean they are evolutionarily They're related on an evolutionary scale. So, for example, the wings of an insect compared to the wings of an owl or a bat are structurally very, very different. But they do the same thing. Just because they do the same thing does not mean they are related. So analogous structures are not evidence of evolution. They do not suggest common ancestry. Homologous structures do suggest ancestry. Analogous structures do not. Vestigial structures. Structures that we have that we may no longer use. For example, body hair on humans. It is not a necessity. It does not necessarily keep us warm. So therefore, we wear clothes in our society. So therefore, it is a structure we still have. It just didn't disappear on us, but it does show an evolutionary relation. Other organisms that also have hair on their bodies are probably related to us. Okay. Another example of vestigial structure, tailbone. A lot of organisms have tails, some don't, some have. We still have a tailbone. Humans have a tailbone. We do not have a tail. Okay. Why? Why did our tailbone not go away? Because it's vestigial. They don't disappear. Lamarck would have said it disappears and it goes away, but that is not true. I already mentioned wisdom teeth. We have wisdom teeth. We don't use them. We don't need them. They don't disappear. Vestigial structures do suggest common ancestry. Okay, so for example, whales have a pelvis and a femur. I don't know. Do we have a pelvis and a femur? Yeah. Ours is used to help us walk. Whales do not walk, but they still have the bones that would make the pelvis and the femur. Another piece of evidence for evolution is called comparative biochemistry. What we're pretty much looking at is DNA and RNA sequences and comparing them to each other. And the more differences you have, the less related you are. Okay? So more difference means more distant ancestry. For example, look at the human compared to the horse, the gorilla, the chimp, and the zebra. This is the amino acids, lysine, glutamine, histidine, isoleucine. These are the different amino acids sequence, okay, in a blood protein, a hemoglobin protein that humans, horses, gorillas, chimps, and zebras have. If you look at the human and you compare it to for example, to the chimpanzee, everything matches up perfectly, which means it would show you here that humans and chimps share a recent common ancestry, meaning that we are closely related. The gorilla then comes next in line to our closest relative. The gorilla would be our next closest relative after the chimpanzee for this particular protein. If you notice, the horse and the zebra have some matching sequences, and they are more closely related than, say, comparing the human to the zebra or the zebra to the horse. The zebra and the horse have a more recent common ancestor. Coevolution just means that some organisms can have an effect on the evolution of another species. So two species can affect each other's evolutionary abilities. The example I'm showing you here is methicillin-resistant staph infections. This is what it looks like on a finger. This is on a back. What this stands for is methicillin resistance means that some bacteria have developed the ability to be resistant to the antibiotics that we have that would hopefully kill them and prevent us from getting ill or getting the infection. How does this happen? Well, humans use a lot of antibiotics. We actually overuse antibiotics. The overuse of antibiotics has allowed certain bacteria to develop measures that help protect them from these antibiotics. Over time, the bacteria become what we call like superbugs. So our current antibiotics cannot kill them. Therefore, that infection cannot be treated in a normal way, meaning antibiotic use will not kill it. When that happens, a lot of times it can lead to the death of the individual, or we would have to start removing limbs potentially, body parts, and cutting out the infected tissue because we would have no medicine that would be able to help kill the bacteria. So coevolution, this example I just gave you, is the use of antibiotics has helped these bacteria evolve more defenses to antibiotics. So we are actually evolving together. We are now done with the lecture. Call it a day.